So the no tax on overtime bill has been introduced in the Senate, and you can read it for yourself. Let's cover it real quick to see how you could be impacted. I'm going to tell you right now, a lot of you are going to be happy, and a lot of you are not. Yeah. First of all, they are still going to withhold all of the taxes from your paycheck every week or 2 weeks, depending on how you get paid. You're still getting taxes withheld. They are going to offer you a tax deduction at the end of the year when you file your taxes. So for all of you people that thought your paychecks were going to get bigger, that's not a thing. In addition to that, if any overtime you work exceeds 20% of your overall income, none of that overtime gets the tax deduction. So you get taxed fully on that overtime. There shall be allowed as a deduction an amount equal to so much of any overtime compensation received by an individual as does not exceed 20%. Who does this impact? Oil and gas workers. Oil and gas workers. A lot of you guys...
I told y'all, Trump said no taxes on overtime, no taxes on tips. And guess what? It just passed the Senate 100-0. Everybody voted for it, no matter what political party you are. It's too good of a deal to turn down, so now anybody that makes less than $160,000 a year will not pay taxes on their tips, and hourly workers will not pay taxes on overtime. Passed the Senate 100-0. That broke history. When it goes to the House, it's going to fly through. Now do y'all believe Trump? Because not only has he done everything he said he was going to do, he's done it in less than 6 months. He ain't even been in office 6 months. And you people are still saying he's a liar. He doesn't tell. He said he was going to do that. And y'all thought it was all bullshit. You know why? Because y'all are just stupid people. Just stupid. Y'all don't want to give the man a chance because he calls people names, but yet he's made everything better on top of the Golden Dome that's going to go over the United States that repels missiles. So no nuclear warfare can get to us. Y'all are just stupid. Stupid fucking people.
No tax on tips, huh? You think that sounds really good? Did you read the fine print? Because I did. It's for cash tips only. And if you've been a server or worked in the service industry longer than 5 years and you've been watching this country decline, you'll know that hardly anybody pays with cash. They pay with card, they pay with tap, or they scan the little QR code at the bottom of the receipt. This doesn't fucking help us. This is going to help no one because we don't claim our tips anyway because we're poor. So yes, pat yourself on the back for the tangerine tyrant pulling another one over on you guys. Fucking dumb.
Let's talk about no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. So the bulk of us saw the Senate pass that 100-0. And of course, MAGA is celebrating because they are saying that the president is keeping his promises. But did you read the fine print? This is the part where y'all start getting mad at people who are on the left because all we say is read the fine print. Do you know the details? If you want to claim your taxes on your tips, by the way, just know that for one, tips that you get on a credit card do not qualify. And two, every tip that you make in cash, you're going to have to claim. Means you're going to have to itemize, which means you're going to have to keep a record of how much cash you made, when you were paid that cash, and how it applies to your overall revenue. What that means is you won't be able to just take a W-2 and file it and then miraculously have an extra 20 or something grand in tip money. Let's talk about overtime. Obviously, they said no tax on overtime, but what they've done is they have raised the requirement, raised the threshold for which people will actually qualify for overtime. And even with that, the company has the right to just not give it to you. It is completely up to the company's discretion if they want to give you overtime that you could potentially claim on your taxes. So all in all, what has this bill changed? What has this bill done to make life easier for the American people? I will tell you, nothing. What they've essentially said is if you want to claim these taxes, you need to be working more, all right? Itemizing and tracking every single piece of cash that you get, every single hour of overtime that you get. And even if you present us with all of this evidence, we can still deny it. Promises made, promises kept, right?
Republicans are not the only major right-wing political party in America. Of course, there are smaller conservative groups like the Libertarian Party and the Constitution Party, but for all intents and purposes, and contrary to what you've probably heard your whole life, the Democratic Party might as well join them on that list. How else could we categorize a party that blocks movement to the left, passively accepts movement to the right, and sometimes even embraces conservatism outright? In this episode, we're looking at how the Democratic Party takes advantage of the current electoral system to stop, to the best of its ability, the progress of left-wing politics and how it even actively promotes a right-wing agenda. We're talking about something called the Ratchet Effect. If you've been following this channel for a while, you've probably already heard me talk about the absurdly stunted American political landscape. If you're new here, the basic idea is this: American politics lean heavily to the right. On one side of the aisle, the Republican Party espouses alarmingly far-right politics, more extreme in their nature than even some notable far-right parties in European politics, like the National Rally in France and UKIP in the UK. Often left out of the story, though, is that the Democratic Party is also on the right. Perhaps not by US standards, but in the range of political ideologies, both parties are devoted to neoliberalism and the ideology's strict adherence to free international trade, austerity, and highly privatized economies. This means that at the end of the day, Democrats and Republicans disagree on relatively few things, and most of those things are minor aesthetic differences or the usual hot-button culture war topics. But stopping our analysis there ignores the special role Democrats play in the American political system. Democrats actively enable the Republican agenda. In politics, this is called the ratchet effect. The idea goes something like this. When Republicans hold power, the gears of the ratchet engage and the machine begins to move to the right, happily clicking along as policies pass, judges are replaced, and budgets are approved. Come the time when Democrats return to power, the ratchet is meant to move left, but the party acts as the pawl, immobilizing the gears, meaning the ratchet remains completely stuck until Republicans return to power and things go back to moving right again. In the real world, this ratchet effect can be seen when Democrats do any, or frequently all, of three things: passively accept movement towards the right, move to the right themselves, and block movement to the left. Let's start with that last one. It's becoming obvious that properly leftist ideas are gaining traction in the US. As I've mentioned in previous videos, more and more people are losing faith in capitalism and are looking elsewhere for options. Popularity in socialism is on the rise, and several policies Americans have typically considered left-wing, like universal health care, increased minimum wages, tuition-free college, and the federal legalization of marijuana are more popular than ever, with around 2/3 of Americans and the overwhelming majority of Democratic voters supporting them. But these policies, and many, many others, never become law. Why? Because Democrats aren't responding to the growth in popularity of leftism. In fact, they're actively resisting it. They do this in several ways. During elections, it's as simple as Democratic elites clearing the path for their more centrist candidates, like Clinton and Biden, by handing them endorsements and the keys to their more powerful fundraising apparatus. The mainstream media also heavily favors these so-called moderates, offering effectively limitless free publicity and often outright slandering the more left-leaning candidates. But it doesn't stop there. Once in government, the party's attachment to centrism only grows. We see this when Biden abandons the fight for a $15 minimum wage long before it starts, leading it to fail in the Senate. We see it in the infrastructure bill going from this to this. We see it in the complete silence of high-ranking Democrats when Amazon workers and Alabama coal miners attempt to unionize or go on strike, leaving them alone and without the support they were promised by America's so-called most pro-union president you've ever seen. Everywhere you look, the ratchet is frozen in place. They aren't fighting like hell for the little guy, they're getting in his way. Now, of course, when Republicans take control of government, the ratchet begins to move freely again. Policies get passed with purely performative resistance. Judges get appointed who uphold right-wing policies for decades, and the country continues trending towards the right. When Democrats return to office, concentration camps along the southern border become immigration overflow facilities and remain open. Immigrants are told, do not come. The U.S. Embassy remains in Jerusalem despite an ongoing genocide, and military budgets continue to rise. Nothing quite illustrates the ratchet effect better than the U.S. corporate tax rate over time. These are the taxes that corporations have to pay, the same way you and I do when we earn our income. Back in 2017, Trump cut taxes for both the richest Americans and corporations, while giving effectively nothing to the rest of us but the promise of an eventual, fictional trickle-down. With this cut, Trump brought the corporate tax rate from an already low 35% down to a paltry 20%, shifting the tax burden even further onto the shoulders of average Americans and away from his party's corporate donors and himself. Thankfully, Biden is bringing it back up to 25%, 28% if we're lucky, 7 to 10 points lower than where it started. Here the trend becomes clear. Year after year, Republicans push further and further for imperialist foreign policy, for xenophobic immigration restrictions, for rich Americans to hoard more and more wealth. Democrats come to appease the masses, promising they'll be different from the previous administrations, returning power to the people, but always less than they had before and never getting in the way of this greater rightward trend. This isn't to say Democrats never pass progressive legislation. They sometimes do, but it remains an exceptionally rare event, especially in comparison to the number of conservative policies that pass, and it's always less than what they promised, less than what they could theoretically achieve, and nowhere close to what would be considered progressive in other developed countries. Now, these are all situations where Democrats appear ineffective, where they try but fail to deliver on the demands of their constituents. But they can be far more harmful. Every time they gain power, Democrats adopt some new right-wing policy, pushing the left further outside the realm of acceptable politics, and allowing the right to claim even more outrageous amounts of ideological territory as it adopts, according to some, the trappings of a fascist state. We've seen this for decades. In the late 60s and 70s, it was law and order. A seemingly innocuous phrase coined by Nixon became realized in full force by Reagan's disastrous war on drugs. Law and order became one of the rallying cries of a political program that threw the black community, black men in particular, in jail with long sentences for so-called broken window crimes. Minor crimes heavily punished so that the state could showcase its power. Politicians drummed up fear of black and minority criminals, while simultaneously terrorizing non-white communities with an over-militarized police force. In the 90s, Democrats latched onto this Republican program with their own narratives. You may have heard the term super predator. This super predator, a young criminal with no remorse, became the myth that glued the Democratic tough-on-crime program together. The Clinton administration in particular led its own wave of over-policing with the infamous crime bill, which included what was called 3 strikes lifetime sentencing, put more police on the streets, increased the scope of the death penalty, and of course, put more people in jail than ever before. These are not the policies of a left-wing government. Generally speaking, Democrats are quick to jump on the police state bandwagon. We've seen it when the Biden administration tries to increase police funding and deploy it against Black Lives Matter protesters. We've seen it with the passage of the Patriot Act by a Democratic-led Senate back in 2001. Over time, Democrats tack more and more right-wing politics onto their agenda, until the Democrats of today begin looking a lot like yesterday's Republicans. There are 2 main reasons the Democrats act this way. First, they rely heavily on large corporate interests. Weapons manufacturers, the pharmaceutical industry, and fossil fuel companies are some of the most influential sources of funding for both political parties, and so will necessarily drag the Democrats further to the right than their constituents and the American people in general want them to go. Just look at the Biden administration's stance on oil drilling. Second, the US works on a mostly majoritarian model of democracy. In these types of democracies, 2 parties naturally rise to power and completely dominate the political arena. Whoever has the most votes, that is, electoral college votes, leads the country, naturally creating the incentive to vote for only those parties who stand a chance of winning. In the US, the Democrats and Republicans. This does a few things. 1, it stops third parties from gaining any significant traction. After all, why vote for the party you like better if they have no chance of winning? 2, it stops the 2 big parties from having to actually be accountable to their core voters, who have no choice but to vote for them so long as they remain preferable to the other option, which they always will. There will always be a, quote, lesser evil. And 3, The two parties must now compete over the same centrist voters to have any chance of winning, forcing them closer ideologically. Since both parties are already dragged towards the right by their wealthy donors fearful of the unruly masses, the center creeps ever so steadily towards the right. And with it goes the entirety of American politics. Every election year, the Democrats elected to the highest levels of power get there by